Hello, you guys. Today we are going to be talking about intaglio. So, intaglio is going to be one of our longer form processes. This is a very technique heavy process. So, we're going to be taking this in small chunks and little steps throughout the rest of the semester. Now, this is going to be our most time consuming project, but because of the time consuming nature, I just want you guys to get into the flow of the material. There's actually something really satisfying and really sweet about the slowness of this process and how technical it is. So throughout the rest of the semester, I'm going to be demoing the process in small chunks for you. So we're going to be working simultaneously on the intaglio as well as on your capstone assignment. So intaglio is the word for engraving, and that's essentially what this process is. It's going to be different from the relief processes that we've worked on so far. So far, we've been working on the high points or the surface of the print. For intaglio, we're actually going to be working with the low points. So this is actually going to be something that's recessed into our surface plate. Our surface plate for this process is going to be metal. So we're going to be incising lines down into metal. Now those lines are actually what are going to capture and hold on to the ink. And then we're going to be using the press to actually lift the ink out of those lines and onto our paper. So it is going to take us a few steps to actually get the lines created, get our pieces etched, and then actually pull our prints. So we're going to be starting with the first steps on Tuesday, which is actually prepping our plates. So this is intaglio. Now, intaglio is a really interesting process because it's quite old. So we're going to be looking back at a historical technique. Now, these are some modern prints of intaglio. You can see a lot of this happening in the 20th century where artists were first starting to engage with real concept and idea development that is a little outside from the traditional structures of art. So you see artists really working with a lot of human emotion and expression. Now, intaglio is really interesting because it has a tone to it. So you guys are going to notice that no matter what the art piece we're looking at, there's kind of this like grayish, dark, somber hue to it. And that's something I really want you guys to play with for your particular pieces. So we can get a range of detail in intaglio. We can make it really subtle and minimalist and kind of playful, like you see in this Paul Klee piece here on the left-hand side. Or it can be something with a lot of detail and really specific design, as you see on the right-hand side. So with this process, we're limited a little bit in our shading, just like we were with the last projects. So you really do have to layer texture to create shading. On the right-hand side, you can see more of a stippled texture on this one. On the left-hand side, you don't really have a lot of texture or shading, but you do have a little bit of texture and detail that just comes off that back plate. So the plate we're going to be using is copper. Sometimes you guys will see zinc used at the plate. It just requires a different acid. So we're going to be focused on working with copper. Now, when we're working with a plate, we're working with a metal plate. So it's going to have a really distinct texture when the plate actually hits the paper, and that's called plate bite. And you can actually see that on the edges of these two pieces. Do you guys see that kind of soft shadow there with just a little bit of ink? That's actually the plate indenting itself into the paper. So this is going to be a little more 3D than our other pieces are. Now here we have another image of Paul Klee's work. He was really interested in playing with storytelling and altering the human form. So you kind of see this strange, almost grotesque human body growing into the branches of this tree. It's one of my favorite things about intaglio is just how kind of like creepy and unsettling the vibe of intaglio pieces are. And you can really play this up with your subject matter, or you can kind of soften it down with your subject matter as well. Now, Paul Klee was definitely playing into that creepiness and that kind of spooky, unsettling vibe with his pieces. But you almost have to think about the time in which this piece was made. It was made in 1903, so things were just starting to pick up with World War I. So he was really feeling the weight of the world at the time he created these pieces. And you can kind of see that dark humanity show up in his context. Now here we have another one of his. You guys can see this is 1927. So this would have been just a little bit later on in his career. Now, this is also the time that you have people like Picasso and Duchamp working with cubism. So, the process of seeing all objects from all sides at the same time. So, this is his view of an ancient city, and he was drawing the image as if you could see everything. So, it almost feels like a diagram or like an engineer plotted point. And this one again has that tone really washed down. You guys can play with the ink to make things a little more tonal like we saw in his last piece. This one would have been a really cleanly wiped plate, so this doesn't have a lot of that grayscale or that tone in the back. So that's going to be something as an artist you kind of play with in terms of your design. Now here we have Picasso, and I can't think of anything more disturbing than a Picasso except for a Picasso intaglio. So you guys can see the shading and the shadows here as well as those white highlights. Now because of the tone shift into that middle gray, this almost has like a grotesque kind of monster-like feel to it. And this is in contrast to his normal work, which has kind of a poppy color spectrum. So it's definitely interesting to see that grayscale. The reason I chose to put this one into the piece is because this has a great example of how we'll use cross-hatching and lines that are closer together to build up darker shadows. So the further apart the line is, the more negative space, the more white you actually have in your piece. Now, the closer together the lines are, the darker the imagery is going to get. So you guys will kind of push, pull, and play with that as you are designing your own plates. Now this is Emil Noldi, and this is a different process here. We won't be engaging in this one necessarily. This one is an aqua tint, so it uses some materials to bind to the surface. Now you can get tones like this just by selectively wiping your plate. So I'll show you guys an example of how to achieve this when we're actually working on our plates. And this one I thought was very fun. This is kind of a circus scene. What I love about this one is how minimal this piece is. There's not a lot of action and activity, but it does tell us a whole story. Now this one does have some selective altering of the piece. You can see that little shoe is painted red. So this one would be a variable print. Now here we have Joseph Thompson working with shading by applying closer pieces together and then also working with that soft kind of wiping of the background to create those tonal shifts. There's something really spooky about this piece, partly the tone, but also all those kind of humanist rabbits looking at us. It's just kind of strange and off-putting. The empty eyes is another thing that is kind of playful with this piece, and I'm very drawn to the composition. Now here we have another one, two dogs interacting with each other in these kind of natural cages. Again, a darker tone to these pieces, which you can expect. This one is a great example of the plate bite, where you can actually see the tone of the materials. And then you can also see this signed like a traditional print. Now I love the quality of this one. There's almost like a contour line study to this. I also like that there was some lines drawn in the background just to give this kind of a strange context. The way things are layered over each other is also really satisfying in this piece, but I just think the handling of the line work is so nice. Now here we have one that's much more clean. So this one would have had the back of the plate completely wiped clean before taking the print. And this is sort of a bird, plant, animal hybrid happening here on this piece. You can see that it all disappears into that more tree-like structure. And this one is an artist that's really interested in industrial sites and kind of collapsing those sites into each other. So you have some areas of really harsh detail and some areas of more soft detail. Either way, this feels like fairground, industrial, kind of a strange post-apocalyptic world. Again, the tone is just going to make all of these pieces intense. So I want you guys to keep that in mind as you're coming up with your design. Here we have a few more of his projects. These ones almost fall apart and become almost like a schematic or something more drafted like you would see in an engineer's workbench. I think these are fantastical and sort of otherworldly too. Like these could be schematics from an alien world, and I love that context. Now this one is very off-putting and unsettling, but that's because you have the multiplication of the face, and that's really hard for our brains to comprehend. So having multiple eyes, multiple ears is just something that's going to make it really hard to focus on, and this piece leaves me feeling very unsettled, which I think is amplified by the tone of the intaglio print. Here we have another one. Do you guys see how hard it is to kind of focus visually on this and how sort of strange this piece feels? A really intense toning to the background. These always remind me of like old films or things that have that kind of a, I don't know, staggered or shifting background. Here we have another one. This one is more of an illustration. This one has beautiful cross hatching and really nice details. We kind of have to be careful with intaglio. We want to keep our lines nice and thin. If we go too thick with our lines, it's really hard to force the ink down there and to get the lines to hold the ink during the wiping process. So you want to keep your lines nice and fine or highly textured. So though these are wider lines, they do have a lot of texture in there, so it actually works to hold the ink. If you guys have too wide of lines, so that ink is just not going to hold down in there. Now the outside edge of this was beveled to almost make a picture frame like quality, and then that was also cross hatched, so the ink would actually bite down on the outside edges of the print, which is why you kind of get that frame that's built into this piece. So that's optional if you guys want to have a little texture there. Now here we have some strange plants. You can see just that slight tonal shift where the actual plate is compared to the paper. And then this one is a true studio drawing. So this is a drawing of the printmaking studio. I kind of love that the tool to make the print is the tool that's focused on for the print. It's almost like it's like the hand drawing itself. So this one is pretty fun. You can see the examples of the cross hatching and how that was used in this design to create those tonal shifts. All right, that's what I have for you. Please go back and reference back to our Moodle page so that you guys can see the idea development aspect of this. Make sure that you guys move through the critique and then also watch the capstone video.